Today we're going to talk about the Econobox that everyone forgot, or maybe you didn't even know it existed, the Daihatsu Charade.
It started in Japan in 1907 and became one of the most respected automobile companies in the world, Daihatsu.
Today I'm joined by my friend Paul here, who has graciously allowed me to film with this 3-cylinder monster. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Hey, no problem, no problem. Monster indeed, all 53 horsepower, when new, when new.
So there's probably like 30 left maybe now?
Probably 30 left in it, yeah, I would think 30.
So what are we looking at here? What year is this?
So this is my 1991 Daihatsu Charade. This is an SE model, so it's kind of the base trim, so it has the 3-cylinder 993cc motor that makes 53 horsepower, as well as a 5-speed manual transmission and not much else. It is very basic transportation.
Where did you find a Daihatsu Charade?
Well, it wasn't an easy thing to find, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's not like these are everywhere.
It's not like they're everywhere. It's not like you can just pop down to like CarMax and buy one. But that's actually where I got it.
You got it at CarMax?
I got it at CarMax, yeah, I did actually. I was working for CarMax at the time, and as an employee, you were allowed to purchase the vehicles that were sold into the dealership. I would always be checking, thinking like, oh, you know, it'll never happen, it'll never happen. There's never gonna be a Daihatsu Charade. And then one day, there was a Daihatsu Charade. So I immediately was able to, you know, convince my wife that this is something that we have to buy right now because this is a very rare opportunity.
Yes.
And so,
Does she understand?
Oh yeah, she understands for sure. She knew my obsession with the car. They were just very difficult to find, but this basically fell into my lap, so I had no choice but to pick it up. It was a $600 car, but after all the taxes, I don't know if it's a sign or anything, but it came out to about $666.
Okay, the Charade from hell. But it actually hasn't been from hell. This has been a pretty good car.
It's been great. So when I bought the car, it had 215,000 miles on it, which is a lot.
Yes.
Now it has about 223,000 miles on it. So I've had it now for over 8 years. This has actually been the longest car I've owned besides my Volkswagen Beetle that's been in my family. And it's been wonderful the whole time. There's only ever been really one time when it's kind of stranded me, and it was when the starter went out.
What kind of got you into Daihatsu? Like we said, there's not that many Daihatsus here. They weren't here for very long. Why are you so into these cars?
So a lot of it comes back to just my love for kind of slow and small cars. It stems back to my love for the Volkswagen Beetle. And then as I was growing up and getting more and more into cars, I was kind of realizing I was starting to like more of the weird stuff versus the everyday, oh, I like Mustangs or Camaros or something. I was a little bit different. The second Gran Turismo game came out and they had Daihatsus in it, and that was in about 2000, and it sparked my memory of like, I remember seeing Daihatsus in America. I should get one. That's when I realized just how rare they are, and at the early days of the internet, there wasn't a whole lot of information on this out there. So that's kind of what started the search in about 2000, and it wasn't until about 2015 when I got this thing.
In the process of being interested in these cars and learning about this one, you started to gain a lot of knowledge about the history of Daihatsu in America. So you can tell us a little bit about Daihatsu history in the US?
Yeah, so Daihatsu was one of the last of the major Japanese car companies to come to the United States. They were established in 1986, and then the first cars started trickling in very late 1987. They were here officially from 1987 till people say 1992. There was a couple 1992 model year cars that were sold, but only like 19 of them.
Okay.
So it was a very short run they had here in the United States. They didn't have the capital to have their own standalone dealerships. What they had to do is they had to usually franchise out and get attached onto other dealerships. So a lot of times when I'm looking for things like Daihatsu license plate frames from dealers, it's attached to like a Cadillac dealership or something of the like.
Got it.
So the Charade was offered as a 3-door hatchback and also as a 4-door sedan in America. They also made a 5-door body, but that was not sold in the United States. The sedan is probably one of the more rare cars because they only made those for basically 2 years. And the thing with those is they didn't have the wonderful 3-cylinder motor. They had a 4-cylinder engine in it.
Wow.
Made about 75 horsepower versus the 53. So total number of Daihatsu sold in the United States was actually about 50,000.
Oh, okay.
There was 2 models that were actually sold from the brand. Besides the Charade, there was also a small SUV called the Rocky.
Yep.
And that was kind of like if you can imagine a Suzuki Samurai, it was meant to be a competition for that. Because in Japan, Suzuki and Daihatsu Daihatsu were fierce rivals, similar to like Ford and Chevrolet here in the United States. So they had the Rocky and the Charade. Well, they actually weren't very cheap.
Well, isn't that kind of the reason maybe why they didn't sell so well?
It's true, because it was a few thousand more dollars, you could have yourself a Honda Civic.
Yeah.
Or a Toyota Corolla. Honda and Toyota was a much bigger name than Daihatsu. Nobody had really heard of Daihatsu.
So tell us a little bit about the exterior of this car. What do you like about it?
What I like about this is kind of how small it is and the shape, and how the back hatch just basically cuts off. It's very similar to what the Honda Civic looked like, the hatchback, the third generation. I just like the way it looks. It just kind of ends. There's not a whole lot of overhang on the front or the rear. My other kind of favorite thing has been this cut. I think it's just very unique to an Econobox to have kind of a, I've heard this be called a French style side skirt. I think it looks so cool. It makes it very difficult to find aftermarket wheels to put on the car because you have only so much room. Other things that I love about it, I love the Charade font. I think this is great. This actually changed in mid-1990. It used to be a heck blend across that said Daihatsu on it.
Yes.
And then they changed it to just be, they just took it off basically and slapped a Charade sticker. But I just love the font on it. This is like one of my favorite fonts of all time. Other fun things about the car that I like, of course, it's the 90s, so we've got to advertise that we have electronic fuel injection in this vehicle.
Back then we had to tell
everybody, this is
exterior.
not carbureted. This has got fuel injection. So outside of the US, this is just a side marker.
Yep.
That's all they have it for.
So they decided to just cheap out and not put side markers.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a law in the US to have the side markers on the car. So they had an extra space there, and I'm sure they didn't want to change their stamping for the US cars, so EFI it is.
There we go. And you got your basic steel wheels.
Yep. They don't have hubcaps. They just have this little center cap that's got the Daihatsu logo on it. I'm always scared one's going to pop off, but I got a couple more of them.
You got a couple extras. That's good.
I had to.
When you own a Daihatsu, you have to have spares of quite a few things.
You do. I actually have a couple bins back at home that have spares from pieces of cars from junkyards, because once they come in, that's one of the best sources for parts. When I got it, it was in pretty good condition. The only things I did was just some things to make sure the car was going to be running okay. So we went ahead and did a timing belt and water pump thermostat, because we didn't know when the last time it was changed, if it was ever changed, and just did a run through of it, and it's been running great.
Speaking of running, we have to see the beast of a motor that's under here. It almost looks like only half of the engine bay is filled up. So yes, very small engine in this thing.
Here's your banana for scale.
This is a tiny radiator. The radiator is like half the size of a normal radiator.
There's the banana again.
Banana for scale.
Banana for scale.
We didn't bring our tape measure, we just had a banana.
We have a banana.
Yep.
Yeah, so the radiator's tiny, like everything is very small in the car, and the engine bay is half full. That's the transmission right there. It's easy access, so if I ever do need to change the clutch on it, I could probably just take it out from the top. But yeah, there's really a whole lot of room in here. In other markets, they actually did have a turbocharged model, which was an awesome, awesome car. So, but again, it's a 3-cylinder turbo, so it's small.
All right, so we got to check out this interior. Oh, look at this.
The pinnacle of 90s safety.
These seats are really fine. These are nice looking seats. These aren't the originals, are they?
Well, they're the original seats. The previous owner of the car just had them reupholstered in this fine black vinyl. It's very cold in the winter and very hot in the summertime. So, but they're comfortable. It is probably the nicest thing in the car. But overall, this is the interior. The dash, for being a California car its whole life, from my understanding, there's no cracks in it. It's very basic. It has the Daihatsu tape player and radio. That is one thing that doesn't work in the car. So the steering wheel is a little different than what they normally came with. This is actually a Momo steering wheel, and it's got the Daihatsu logo. This was actually out of a Charade de Tommaso, which was a
fancy.
Yeah, it was a special edition car that they made in the 1980s. It's a really cool piece to have in the car. Being one of the lower SE grades, this thing does not have a tachometer on it, so you kind of got to shift by just listening. It'll tell you when it's ready to shift, that's for sure. But it's got the controls for the AC. I actually don't have AC in this one. I took it out. And a fun fact I learned from a technician I knew who actually worked on these cars when they were new is that none of them came to the United States with AC in them. All the ACs were dealer installed. And he said that if you were to take this panel out, right behind that AC button is a hole that's very crudely drilled in there to have this guy installed. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. You got the crank windows, the seat belts. It's a 2-piece seat belt, which is always throws people for a loop in here. So you have your shoulder and this one. So it's almost like a racing harness.
It's a race car, isn't it?
It's basically a race car.
Yeah.
One other cool thing I do want to show you, a fellow YouTuber, Daniel O'Grady from Wasabi Cars, had reached out to me with asking if I wanted this. This is a cool little Daihatsu document holder. So I think it's just kind of a cool little piece of Japan that's with me in the car.
And if we look back here, that's the original upholstery there
Yes.
with the kind of pink and purple and turquoise.
This is just wonderful. This is one of my favorite things. I would love to have the front seats reupholstered in this same material. You look at all these new cars and it's like interiors are black or
Just a
gray or
giraffe
tan.
color,
And it's boring, but this is just so 90s chic and so much fun. The cargo area.
The cargo area is not huge.
It's not. This is one of my treasures. I found this in one of the junkyard cars. It's the parcel tray.
Okay.
It's in good shape and it matches the interior of the car.
How much was this car new?
Daihatsu Charades ranged anywhere from about $6,900 for like the super base model, like that you could probably get if you wheeled and dealed, all the way up to about $8,500. So they did tout their quality in their advertisements, and a lot of the journalists that were reviewing the cars at the time talked about it's worth the money because they're built really, really well. And I mean, this is probably not the best example, but at the same time, this is a 32-year-old car that has 223,000 miles on it, and
It is the best example because it's one of the only remaining examples.
Of the only remaining examples.
All right, we should probably drive it.
Yeah.
All right.
I think we should drive it.
All right, let's go. Just under 1 liter of raw power.
Yes, 1 liter of raw power. The funny thing with the car is, even though it has such, a little engine and little power, it scoots pretty good because from what I've read online, there's no official rating for the weight. I need to weigh the car, but people are saying it weighs like 1,600 pounds, which is low to see least light, if not a little bit lighter.
Yes, when it's that light, you don't really need more than 53 horsepower.
You don't, and that's what really gets me scared for the Charade GTTI model that was sold in Japan and in Europe, because that thing has 100 horsepower. That's got to be an absolute blast to drive. I'd love to get my hands on one of those. The only thing that's a little interesting in this car is there's no power steering, and we're in a front wheel drive car that has very skinny tires on it, so it's actually not too terrible. But for the first time that if I let somebody else drive the car, they're thrown off by just how hard the steering is on it. But when it's at speed, of course, it's perfectly fine and it feels great.
So what do you like about driving this car?
I think it's the fact that there's no other assists on it. There's no power steering, like I said. There's no ABS. You're very connected to the road in this car, as you would be in any of these 80s or 90s cars that don't have all the modern things like electronic power steering and traction control and other sorts of little nannies to kind of keep you in place. So I think it's just the rawness of it is the main thing. And the other thing is I like the way it sounds. The 3-cylinder has a very unique exhaust note. Mine might have a little bit of an exhaust leak,
a little bit.
But it kind of, friends say it sounds like half of a Porsche 911.
Oh yeah, it does kind of have that sound. That's pretty cool.
It's an interesting sound.
There we go. Feel that power. It does sound good.
With its little exhaust leak. One of the best parts about it is even though it's got such low power, I've never once felt scared getting on the freeway with this car, especially here in Los Angeles. It can be kind of treacherous sometimes, but it's fine. I had an old Subaru Outback. I think that car was a lot slower and scarier to get on the freeway with than the Daihatsu. It's an interesting thing for being such an old car with such little power, and it's kind of effortless. It likes doing it.
Are you ever kind of scared driving it just with the rise of these huge SUVs and trucks that are on the road nowadays?
That's always a constant concern in the back of my mind, is that some giant Ford F450 Super Duty is going to run a stop sign or a stoplight and run into the Charade. But in all honesty, I'm not really worried about my safety. I'm more worried about the car getting hurt, because there's just nothing out there. If it gets in even a medium accident, it's done. Insurance will just total it and give me a $50 bill and that'll be that.
So a couple years ago, you were sort of talking about maybe selling this car, and have you had a change of heart since then?
You know, I go back and forth with it because it's a very unique car. I've had this car now for over 8 years, and I feel like I've done my time with it, and I want to move it on. But again, there's really not anybody else out there that would be interested in such a car like this.
The Daihatsu fan club is quite small.
Is quite small, so...
At least in the United States.
At least in the United States.
Yes.
I don't want to say I would get rid of it for anything, but if like the opportunity arose to get maybe one that's a little bit more clean,
sure.
Or if, you know, I'm given the opportunity to own one of those wonderful 100 horsepower Charade GTTIs, that would,
but I cannot see you not owning a Daihatsu. It's kind of like it's in your DNA at this point, isn't it?
I think it is. You know, I toy with it back and forth, and I think about, I need to sell it so I can get some funds for another project I'm doing. But at the same time, it's like $1,000 car.
Yeah,
it's not worth a whole lot of money. It's an extra car for me, so it's nice having the thought that there's an extra car at home if something happens to one of the cars. Like I've got to drive the Charade to work for the next little bit, and then I do it. You know, every time I get in the car and drive it, especially if I don't drive it for like a month or so, I'm like, oh man, this car is so awesome. Everything about it is so raw. It feels so good. That it kind of makes me not want to get rid of it. So every time I think about, I should probably sell the Charade, then it turns into, let me go drive it.
So when you're driving this around, do you get a lot of stares? Do you get a lot of people look at it and wondering what it is, or is it just kind of blend in?
It blends in. Maybe one time I've had somebody look at it and like give me a thumbs up, like they knew what it was.
They knew what it was.
But for the most part, people are just completely oblivious to what this car is.
It's just an old hatchback.
It's an old hatchback. And it's funny because in the time I've owned this car, I've counted the number of times that I've actually seen another Charade out in the wild that wasn't somebody I knew. And there's been 2 times.
2 times.
In 8 years.
They did race Charades, right?
They did, actually. Yeah. They still kind of do. There's still a little bit of a following for the car in Australia and New Zealand, where the car is raced in rally, and it's also, there's a few people that do some road racing with them. As the company was producing the cars, actually, from the 70s, the company went rally racing with these things, and so they raced in what was the WRC, you know, the big-time rally organization. The big thing that the Daihatsu company focused on was the Africa Safari rallies. They did that from the late 70s all the way up through the 80s and then into the early 90s with this chassis. They were successful. They typically always would finish the rallies, and they would barely ever break down. And I think it was the 1990 Africa Safari Rally that they finished on the podium with some of the big names because all the other cars basically broke. Super cool that they did that, and that's one of my dream cars to get to go see. They have it at the Toyota Museum in Japan.
Well, can I drive it?
Of course, you can drive it, of course.
I'm looking forward to that. This reminds me so much of my 87 Tercel hatchback that I had. This actually feels bigger. I think the funny thing is you sit in this driver's seat and it doesn't feel small. You have one feature that my Tercel did not have, and it's a passenger side mirror. That's luxury for this segment of vehicle.
It is luxury, but the first 2 years of the Charade production, they didn't have passenger side mirrors unless you bought the top level CXL trim. The L was for luxury.
Luxury, yes.
I just wish that here in the United States there was a bit more of a availability for things, because that's also the other big thing with this car that's scary. Like I said about if things break, it's kind of difficult to get parts for it.
Yeah.
I think the shock absorbers are the original shock absorbers to the car with 223,000 miles on them.
They don't feel that bad. It's not like this car is wallowing in the corners.
Yeah, they don't. Everything still works. You know, it's the idea of wanting to like replace it though. You can buy them, but Australia is a big market for this car, so they come out of there. Southeast Asia was a big market for these cars as well. So getting parts would be something like sourcing something from there.
Well, I got to agree with you. This car does not feel underpowered. It's kind of weird to say that about a car that came with 53 horsepower from the factory. Right. But it seems fine.
Yeah,
it's not fast, but it's not slow.
And I've thought about maybe taking it out to one of the racetracks, just kind of for fun to see what could it possibly do, you know, but again, therein lies the fear of something potentially devastating happening to the car. So,
well, I gotta say, driving this vehicle brings me back to driving my Tercel. I love that car. That brings me back to those days when we actually could buy a small hatchback that was fun to drive, lightweight, got good gas mileage.
Yeah.
And yeah, they need to bring back cars like this. I mean, what do we have left? The Mirage?
The Mirage,
sort of?
yeah, the Mirage is still here with us.
It's
I
not
think
even cheap anymore.
it's not. The
Yeah.
Accent, I think, is still here,
Yep.
right? You know, the Fits are gone, unfortunately. The Yaris is gone.
Well, we just gotta import more Charades from Japan, I guess. All right, Paul, thank you so much for showing me your Charade today. I really appreciate it.
No problem, no problem.
One of the things that I love about this car is that it's a proper Econobox. We just don't get cars like this anymore.
We don't.
We used to be a proper country.
We used to be.
We need more cars like this. Yeah, maybe they're not the safest on the road, but they're efficient, they're adorable, they're cute, they're easy to park. We need Daihatsu to come back to the US. Yeah, well, actually, you know, after driving this vehicle, I'm pretty sure I need to get a Charade now. So, so maybe I'll be the second member of the Daihatsu Club of America.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're well. We'll see you later.
Everybody is quite sure about his favorite thing. And everybody drives his favorite car. Every time I drive Charade, I discover something new. シャレードにいつも新しいシーンが見える。Come on, Charade。2つのシャレード。シャレード&シャレードソシアル。